Just Ghoul With It is a podcast hosted by two millennials who swear. And also, it's about horror films, so listener discretion is advised. We will put specific content warnings in the show notes. Boo!
Hello. Welcome to Just Ghoul With It, a podcast where we talk about how society influences our favorite and sometimes least favorite horror movies, and then we also give them arbitrary ratings. I'm Nikki.
And I'm Kate.
And today we're going to talk about It Follows. I said that really excitedly for a movie that's really weird.
Yeah, just a little bit weird. But before we get into that, do you want to tell us some background info on the movie?
Oh, I so do. So the first thing I wrote was, this was directed by a man, because it surprised me. His name was David Robert Mitchell. Which...
That's three first names.
That's
excessive. Save some for the rest of us.
Sir, please.
Sir.
And I don't know if it was his first movie. I didn't really look to see what other things he had, worked on. But I think this was, his first feature film. I think he did shorts. I'm not positive. But this came out in 2014. And then Mike Gialakis, I don't know how to pronounce it. If anyone does know how to pronounce it, let me know so I can say it correctly. He did the cinematography, which I loved, which is why I specifically wrote it down. And then other than cinematography, I wrote down who did the music because I loved the music. It was Chef's Kiss. So it was done by Disasterpiece. His real name is Rich Vreeland, but he's an electronic artist. And I said when I was watching it that it sounded like video game music almost. Have you ever played Oxenfree? Because it sounded like Oxenfree.
Yeah!
Which is a really cool... Actually, Oxenfree, I wrote it down. It reminded me of this specific movie because it was very, the beach and it was dark and, yeah, so real spooky. But he makes video game music. This guy does. So I was I was right. Yeah, so...
Brilliant.
I'm a genius. Yeah, so, and I think the only other movie he's done was Under the Silver Lake, which I have not seen.
Huh.
But will watch just because of this, because I really liked his music.
Hell yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So, we have some background information. How about a synopsis of the movie, which I do know is one of your specialties?
Cruel. Yeah. Giving a synopsis is absolute hell. Let's do this. Here's the fun thing. People don't know, but we've already done this once because of my sound fucking up, and I still don't know what to say. And you've read the synopsis to me. I still don't know. I know that it's about a girl and she has a boyfriend, or she's going on dates with this guy, and they have sex after a few dates, and he's real weird. I just want to point out during their dates, he's real sketchy, and she's still it's okay. Which I get it,
The things we overlook.
The things we overlook, the red flags of him being oh, we should leave the movies. I'm not being weird. And you're being a little weird. So yeah, they have sex, and then he drugs her and takes her to this scary fucking parking garage, and he's yo, this monster's gonna follow you. Sorry. And she's okay. And then he just leaves her in the street, blah blah blah, and it's wild, it's buck wild and terrible. And she's hey guys, there's a monster following me, to her friends, and her friends go, no. And then, they quickly find out that there is indeed a monster following her. I guess a curse, monster curse, whatever. So she's being followed. Yeah, so she's being followed by a curse monster, and it's terrifying because it can take the shape of people she knows, people she doesn't know, just creepy people. And it only walks; it doesn't run. So that's weirdly more spooky.
It ambles.
I would prefer if it ran at me than just walk, because then it's what, you think you're better than me? You think you can just walk at me? I'm not going to be able to get away?
Is this a power move? Is this the power move?
Yeah, exactly. It was so you think you can catch me even walking? And they probably could, because I'm a very sedentary person.
I do not run.
Move a lot. I don't run. So, yeah, and so she, they set up traps, they try to catch the monster. She, kind of tries to pass it on, but, doesn't. Because that's another thing. If the person you pass it to dies, it just goes back to you. So, that's a bummer. Yeah, and then they capture it. There's a lot of pools. I think there might only be 2 pools, but I feel there's a lot of pools.
There are, in fact, 2 pools, but there are a lot of shots of those pools.
She swims a lot.
She swims
a lot. Loves the water.
She moodily looks upon the water a lot. She swims in it. She almost dies in it. Spoiler alert. You know,
classic.
Water. Classic.
You know. So yeah, that's what I took from it. I'm sure that you're gonna read the synopsis again, and I'm gonna be like, oh right, that's what this movie's about.
So your synopsis was a masterpiece. I will also share one from Rotten Tomatoes.
Great.
After carefree teenager Jay sleeps with her new boyfriend Hugh for the first time, she learns that she is the latest recipient of a fatal curse that is passed from victim to victim via sexual intercourse. Death, Jay learns, will creep inexorably toward her as either a friend or a stranger. Jay's friends don't believe her seemingly paranoid ravings until they too begin to see the phantom assassins and band together to help her flee or defend herself.
So I got that part right. Her friends don't believe her.
Yeah.
We read the same thing.
Yeah, no, those were carbon copies of each other. Exactly the same. You know, they might have plagiarized your synopsis. I don't want to say it. I don't want to accuse anyone.
I didn't want to bring it up, but it did sound like they copied me.
Yeah, it does. It's okay.
Yeah. So that's what the movie's about. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I would say go watch it before you listen to this. Or if you really just want to be confused and, I don't know, go for a wild ride, then don't watch it. Follow your heart. I'm not going to boss you around. Okay, so I've told you a few facts. A few of my teeny tiny little facts. And I've given you a spot-on synopsis. That's 2 chef kisses so far. That's a 3rd. I know, that's how good I feel about this movie. Now, let's get some real facts from what I like to call Kate's Nerd Corner, where Kate takes excessive and beautiful notes and actually gives us genuine facts about this movie. Not just about the movie, but just like about the themes of the movie and how society influences it.
It is aptly named Kate's Nerd Corner because I am a nerd and this is where I will nerd out. I do want to preface it with kind of this thing. This is not the only way or the right way to enjoy horror films. There is no wrong way to enjoy horror unless you're like recreating it with non-consenting folks. That is a wrong way.
That's a wrong way.
That's a wrong way. I feel comfortable saying that's a wrong way. And same. I will also say, gotta double check with my lawyer, but Just Ghoul With It does not endorse that. So
we don't.
No.
We don't.
Hard line on that.
But yeah, like Kate takes lots of notes and does lots of research. I write down 1 page that says like 2 words and I go, that's good. I'm really enjoying this. We are very different, but we both love horror the same amount. So
I was an AP English nerd and then grad school made that permanent. So this is just who I am now. This is what it is. I spent hours researching and I actually cut 3 pages of notes because I was like, no.
God.
Save it. Build to that.
I took 2 pages and I went, don't overdo it. I'm a nasty little gremlin, man. I wrote it down so bad, even I can't read it, so.
I was like moving my notes to a different page and I was like, oh my God. Let them want more.
Oh my God, I love it. All right, take us away. Whisk us away to Kate's Nerd Corner.
So in this particular iteration of Nerd Corner, I want to explore cultural context and historical influences. So one question I kept asking myself while watching, aside from why pools, was why pools? What's the point of focusing on urban blight in this film? Why is it brought into focus repeatedly? And then and then an article
in Detroit, right?
Yep. Yeah. And that's actually where Mitchell is from. And not exactly the same area, I don't think, but I don't know shit about Michigan. I'm from Ohio.
I don't either.
We don't like that state.
We don't like each other, apparently.
Michigan's fine, live pure, whatever it is.
Yeah,
I don't know.
think it's fine. I don't know.
It's great. Don't come for us.
Don't, please.
So, I was wondering, I think I Googled, urban blight, it follows, because I was like, why? And then an article kindly reminded me when this movie was released and what happened only years prior. So, as Nikki said, It Follows was released in 2014. Mitchell, however, did start writing it in 2011, and filming began in 2013. So, what cultural events or contexts are important to understand? To answer that, let's journey back to 2008, even though I'm sure we'd rather not.
Yeah, I was like, okay, yeah, bold choice.
I'm going to say, personally, 15 wasn't great for me, so...
I wasn't thriving.
No, I was getting through.
Oh my God.
So, financial crisis, Great Recession, housing crisis. There are a lot of ways to refer to what happened from 2007 to 2009. but you can call them any of those things. I'm sure there are many more. In the US, we officially entered the Great Recession in 2007, though many call it the 2008 financial crisis. And it was the most severe economic downturn since the Great Depression in 1929. So, for the US, it officially ended in 2009, but here and across the globe, the effects were long-lasting. I know that in my hometown, it was felt severely and was compounded by the pullout of a major employer in our county, this ginormous shipping hub that was like air freight. So my town is like 13,000 people, and this place employed like 7,000 to 10,000 people in the Tri-County area. A lot were from my town. So then it pulled out. And suddenly, like, all the jobs were gone.
Damn.
So my town went from a 4% unemployment rate to 15%. So it was a rough time.
That is a rough time.
I'm not trying to brag, but 60 Minutes visited us to talk about how sad we were. And Rachel Ray redid our soup kitchen and did a Thanksgiving special in our hometown.
Thank you, Rachel Ray.
Thank you, Rachel Ray.
This is not endorsed by Rachel Ray, but like, listen, it could be. Hit us
Sponsor
up, Rachel. That's wild. See, I came from a town that was our entire like. We made our money based on tourism because I grew up in Florida, so like, you know, tourism was basically how we got our money, and it never really stopped. Like, so. My town was not as hard hit by this. I mean, it probably was. I mean, I was a high school kid. I didn't fucking pay attention. But, like, I'm sure that it was just as bad. But, like, we never had that big of an issue because, like, old people love Florida and they're always going to love Florida. Yep. So, yeah.
I don't want to, like, get too far into the weeds on this, but certain parts of Florida will be underwater in, like, the next, you know, some decades. And people are still buying places in Florida. Like, it's unstoppable.
Like, my family still lives in Florida. My, like, grandparents like bought a house in Florida recently and they're from here, like they live in Ohio, and I'm like, what are you gonna do with that? Whatever, if they want to live in that horrible town. I'm sorry, people who are from Florida, it's totally fine. Florida's fine. I grew up in a part of Florida that was not fine, so I have feelings about it. But,
a few feelings were had.
A few.
So I was only like 15 during the Great Recession, but there was like this sense of dread and fear and hopelessness. You could see it in the adults. College was already expensive. Would my family be able to afford it? Would the family-owned business stay afloat? Would my friends have to move because their parents lost their jobs?
God.
Overall, a sense of foreboding and precarity reigned. And this was felt in communities across the U.S., though the media, much like this film, focused almost entirely on the white middle-class experience.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Oh my God, you're right.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone in this movie wasn't white.
No,
actually.
Like, literally there is not a single character of color, which is actually a trope that I have for later.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. I'm going to dive into that at another point. So anyway.
I'm excited.
Why is it relevant that this film was produced after a monumental financial collapse? After all, It Follows is about a curse that passes through sex. Not exactly about investment bankers or whatever they're called. I don't know what they're called. Eat the rich and all that. So, to answer that, I think first it's important to ask how society understands its own fears and anxieties through metaphor and symbolism, particularly in horror. There are a lot of ways to say that something is a product of its time. Often it's used to avoid apology for insensitivities and blatant oppression. But in this case, I'm focusing on the question, what were the central anxieties of this period? How is this movie a product of its time? So, to give an example, in the 1950s, there was a lot of fear over nuclear testing and nuclear war. Wonder why. And there were also broader fears around space and scientific advancement, especially because there had been like debut technology that was horrifically efficient in the most recent World War. And there was also this fear of differing ideologies, which is explored a lot.
Yeah.
So we see that anxiety reflected in movies like The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and It Came from Beneath the Sea.
Kate's blowing my mind right now, and people can't see my face, but my jaw's just been open for like 5 minutes. Because like, I didn't think about any of this. I was just like, cool movie, love the lighting. This is wild to me.
Oh man, okay, so I'm tempted to go decade by decade. I'm not going to do that right now, but you can break down like the central anxieties of like each period and point to specific horror movies that like reflect these cultural anxieties and fears.
We're going to add a Patreon tier that's just you going decade by decade. So if you guys want to hear Kate go decade by decade, you can sign up.
I start off with an analysis of anxiety versus fear. Because they're different. Anyway.
They're different.
So in The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and It Came from Beneath the Sea, both of these featured monsters that were irritated and or woken by atomic testing and came to share their sentiments on the fact. So, going back... Yeah. So going back to the recurring motif of decay and ever-present dread. There are so many readings of it follows. And they're almost all valid. But a few that I'm interested in are these. So a lot of folks call it like the entity, the it that follows. Oh, and I prefer to call it the entity because saying it, I find confusing with Pennywise. But that's just me. So The entity. So I think a few readings are the entity represents economic anxiety that was ratcheted up due to the Great Recession, or it could stand in for the ever-present and crushing nature of capitalism as a force of oppression, or possibly the passing along of the curse is symbolic of the financial crisis being passed along to millennials who are emerging from the school into a crashed market with no jobs to be found, only broken promises.
Oh my god, this makes the movie like 10 times scarier in my opinion, because I'm like, oh no! I don't want that burden.
So I think a reading of the entity as some form of economic anxiety dovetails really well with the recurring motifs of the end of innocence, the lost childhood. And we can get more into those motifs, but like when you see her plucking flowers when she's in the car with you, like I love that the plucking of the flower is often symbolic of the end of childhood. Right. And after she is attacked in the kitchen or followed scarily in the kitchen by the entity, she steals a neighbor's like undersized bike, like a child's bike, and bikes to the playground. And so she's like reclaiming aspects of childhood in like this way to flee adulthood or...
Yeah, like going back to where she felt safe as a kid to avoid... Oh my god.
Yeah. So we've talked society. No. Let's talk horror.
Yeah, okay. So it's so funny. Okay, so like everything you said makes way more sense than like what I've written down. Because I wrote all my notes before I heard any of this. So... I guess the one thing that I wrote down that I thought the entity was supposed to be, before I knew all this is probably going to sound stupid now, but I thought it was interesting because it almost felt like a way that to shame the woman for enjoying sex. Because that's a thing is that like men can enjoy sex totally fine. Mm-hmm. But then when a woman does it, it's like, oh, whoa, you can't do that. Yeah. So it almost felt like they like turned like the scrutiny that women get for enjoying sex into like an actual monster that can like follow them. That's what it felt like to me when I was watching it. But then at the same time, that is kind of taken away by the fact that like there are men in the movie who like the same thing happens to. So it felt like that at first, but then I guess the longer you watch, the more you're like, maybe not, because I guess it happens to everyone. So now that you've explained that just makes more sense. And I'm like, oh my god.
I think there are a lot of valid readings. Like, I think that there's totally a reading where it's like the cultural discomfort with women's sexuality.
Oh, yeah. You know? Like, it's just, ugh. It was just a good movie. Uncomfortable to watch at times, for sure. Just because of the whole, this poor girl. Like... It made me so mad when I was watching it because the man, Hugh, I think his name is, has like no problem passing this on to her. Like that is his plan from the start. Once he finds out that this is like a problem, he's like, well, I gotta pass it on. That's what I gotta do. And like, he gets a whole plan, makes a date. He courts this girl. I say court like I'm in fucking 1800. But he does. Like he takes her on dates.
Asks permission.
He's like, yes, we'll go on a date to the circus.
I brought flowers.
He does.
To the circus.
But that's where people go on dates in the 1800s, the circus, right? Yeah, sure. They throw peanuts at elephants. Don't do that. Elephants don't like that.
But, advocate for elephants, Nikki.
Yeah, that's me. But they go on dates and stuff, and he like plans this clearly to the point where he like rented an apartment. Like he had all of these things planned out. Went to a town that he knew people wouldn't know him. Whereas when she gets this curse, her first instinct is like to be scared, but also like it's not to pass it to anybody. Like, she thinks about it for so long because she's like, that's not right. Like, she's like, I can't do this to somebody else. And it just, to me, that was so interesting because I was like, a man's first instinct is, I'll get rid of this. I'll give it to some girl, whatever. Whereas the girl was like, that ain't right. Like, I'm not going to do that.
And something that's wild is I don't think she was the first person he passed it to.
Oh, no, because he knew
Annie.
That if you...
very first... The person that, like, the opening scene is...
The girl,
Someone else pointed this out. It was not I that noticed this. But the photo they find of Hugh in the porno magazine, it
He's
has...
with a girl!
Yeah, and that's the girl that dies in the first scene.
And he mentions, he's like, oh, well, if you die, it comes back for me. Because he knows.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's just another girl that I'm assuming it was probably, if there's pictures of them, like a girlfriend or someone that he was, like, dating. But still, like, he had no problem. He was just like, oh, well, she died. Got to give this to someone else.
Yeah.
And the whole movie, it made me mad. The whole movie. Because she thinks so hard about it. Like, even people who are offering to do it, she's like, no, I don't want to do that. And this guy was just like, I don't care. Oh, yeah. I was furious. The whole time.
Well, that's so valid because this movie really dissects, like, consent. And, like, the cops at one point, like, after she gets dropped off in the street by Hugh, like, I think still, like, bound and just in her underwear. I think
she's not bound, I don't think, but she is just, like, in her underwear. Like, she doesn't have her clothes.
No. He literally leaves her in front of her house on the street, and her friends are, like, outside playing a card game, which it might not be the scene, but at one point the card game they're playing is Old Maid, in which there are no winners, there's only a loser.
Yeah, it is this one.
Which I think really ties into,
another chef's kiss. That's the fourth. It was really great.
So when the cops talk to her, they're like, and it was consensual, and you just see her kind of, like, nodding mutely, and it wasn't, because she didn't have full disclosure. Like, it was not a consensual
I was so upset at that part too, because it also felt like they were just, like, not necessarily, I mean, they probably weren't blaming her, but it was very much like, well, like, what are we gonna do? You said you wanted to do this. And it was like, yeah, but I didn't know that he had a fucking curse. Like, that's not...
I also didn't know he was going to chloroform me, tie me to a wheelchair, and then dump me on the street. So, like, there were a lot of levels to how fucked up it was.
You cannot give consent when you don't have the whole story. Right. And I was furious when they were like, well, was it consensual? And I was like, no! Ugh.
No.
Yeah. That probably made me so mad.
That I teach for my job is that consent is fries. Freely given, reversible, informed. And, you know, the ES. It's important too. But it's, like, enthusiastic and specific, but informed. She was not informed of what all this entailed. So it wasn't consensual. And that theme comes back, like, even more aggressively when you see Greg die. We haven't talked about Greg yet. He sucks.
Oh, right. Greg.
Yeah.
I honestly forgot his name because I was like, this guy sucks. Like, I just kept calling him the bad neighbor. I was like, ugh, this bad neighbor.
He's basically the epitome of the male gaze in this movie because he literally ogles all of the women.
Every single woman. And he literally has that whole white knight thing where he's like, well, I'll just can't. He doesn't believe her. But he's like, well, if I say I believe her, or even if I don't, I'll say that I can save her, and then, you know, I'll get what I want.
Yeah. And
he does. But then he gets his comeuppance, and I didn't feel bad. I was like, nope, sorry, Greg, bye.
No. And, like, there's a scene where he's, like, surrounded by laughing girls at a table, and I keep wondering if, like, Yara and, like, Paul and Kelly are asking him, like, you haven't seen anything? He's like, no, I haven't seen anything. Was he sleeping with a lot of other girls and they were killed off one by one and that's why he hadn't seen anything? Because maybe, like, it doesn't leave anyone alone for that long.
Well, see, and that's the other thing about this movie is that there is not a super distinct timeline. Like, there's no distinct time period. We know
my
that.
God, yes.
Which is, like, one of my favorite things that movies do is when everything's kept so vague and just, it's like that uncanny valley of, like, this could be modern, this couldn't be, I don't know what this is, but I liked it. Like, I loved, that was one of my favorite parts. But there's also no distinct timeline, so you really I don't think, someone could correct me, maybe they say, but I don't know if they ever say how long Greg has had this. So, like, there's no way to really know if he's just, like, passing it along and that's why he hasn't seen it. Or if he's just, they happen to be far away when he got it. I don't know. But
yeah. And I feel like maybe part of the timelessness, like, I do want to talk separately about how there's no distinct time period setting for the movie, because that's fucking fascinating. But also, maybe the lack of distinct timeline is reflective of the fact that she's not sleeping. All days are, like, blending into each other, and she's in, like, a fugue state. And, yeah.
You're kind of experiencing that with her, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we see her really sleep.
Nope.
Like, the whole time. I mean, you really don't. Like, she's just... Oh, that poor thing. She's so scared. You really felt for her the whole time. And she's, like, watching, and she's, like, paying attention for Greg, even though he's so shitty. He doesn't care. Like, he doesn't give a shit. And she's still, like, watching out her window for, like, hours to make sure he's okay. And he doesn't deserve it.
He doesn't deserve it.
But whatever. But, yeah. It was infuriating. Because he finds her at the playground?
Yeah.
And then he, like, drives them around, and that's how he kind of gets involved. And then there's Paul.
Oh my god, Paul.
Yeah, like, I have mixed feelings about Paul. This movie has a good way of, like, kind of showing many different aspects of, like, shitty men, in my opinion. Because you've got, like, Greg, who's just in it for sex. He's got one thing that he cares about, and it's just, like, I don't really care what your situation is. I'm gonna get what I want to get. And then you've got Hugh, who is like, I know the situation, and I'm gonna do everything in my power to do what's best for me, and I don't care about you. And you have Paul, who is this, like, manic pixie dream girl in love with this girl his whole life, thinks that this is, like, I'm gonna save her, and then she'll know that, like, we were meant to be in love this whole time. And there's that scene where she's, like, really upset, and he, like, touches her hand, and he's like, I've always loved you. And I'm like, read the room, Paul. I wrote that in my notes. I wrote, read the room, Paul, because I was like, I know that you love this girl, or at least you think you do. Yeah. This is not what she needs right now.
No.
So they did a good job of making me hate every man.
He barely touches her fingers, and then he leans in for a kiss. And I was like, oh yeah, that's consent for a kiss. You let me touch the tips of your fingers.
They barely touch. And at that point, she hasn't slept in, like, weeks. So, like, I don't know. I was just so upset. I was like, this man, Paul, like, and he's supposed to be, like, you know, the good one, in a way. Like, he's the one that you're like, oh, he's, like, her real friend. He wants to help her. But the more you watch, you're like, the whole time, he is just like, I have to be with her. I have to be with her. I love her. I gotta be with her. And it's like, oh, you've built her up in your head so much that, like, you just, ugh.
Yeah, he's in love with the idea of her and, like, seeing himself with her. Because, like, at one point, you see his jealousy so clearly throughout, but, like, they're on a couch, and he's like, why'd you choose him? Referring to her passing the curse off to Greg.
Right.
And she was like, I thought he was tough enough. He wasn't scared. Like, she thought about it so hard, and she tried to get consent, like, throughout the entire thing, but Greg didn't believe her. And then Paul's like, why'd you choose him?
Right, like, it's not even like, are you okay? I'm really sorry that this has happened. I'm really sorry that we just had to watch Greg get murdered. But instead, he's just like, why didn't you have sex with me? It's like, oh, Paul, shut the fuck up.
Yeah. And something interesting about Paul is that there are so many, like, hints dropped to, like, a past, and they pick up a lot of them and explain them. Like, they talk about their first kiss being at the pool.
Oh, you're right. Yep.
But he also says, like, man, we haven't had a sleepover here since, like, you know, you were this age or whatever. And she's like, there's a reason, you know. And then awkward silence. It's like, what did he do? And they made a joke earlier. Like, it was either Yara or Kelly. And they were like, oh, you know, you're going to wake up and Paul's going to be humping your leg. And I was like, is that why he's not allowed over?
I know. They kept mentioning it. And I was like, Paul, like, I feel like he did something that was just accepted when he was, like, a little kid, which shouldn't have been. But, like, you know, like, it was just like, oh, that's Paul. He loves her. And it's like, I don't care. Like, he, ugh. And then they mentioned him kissing her sister,
yes, too. I was about to say.
It's like he couldn't have her, so he was like, well, I guess, like, what? Someone's related to you, so I guess I'll kiss them? Like, I don't know. Paul just drove me nuts just as much as everyone else. And I know he's this, like, knight in shining armor meant to save her, but I was done with Paul from the start.
Yeah. I feel like we are offered, like, a problematic view of him in several ways. So he's not, like, set up to be the hero, but he believes himself to be the hero.
Right. I think that you're meant to believe that he believes it. Like, he believes it so hard that it almost could be true in the movie. Like, you're watching it and you're like, maybe, but they've dropped so many of these little hints that if you just pay attention enough, you're like, this man is not a hero.
No.
Because, like, spoiler alert, they do have sex. Like, they pass it along to each other and everything, and they're walking down, you know, the sidewalk, the end scene, holding hands with, like, people around them, and you don't know who's who, you don't know who has it at that point. So it's like, did he save the day? Like, no, I mean, not really. Like, they're stuck with each other now.
And you have to love that ambiguous ending.
Yeah, the ambiguous ending. You don't know really how long it's been. You don't really know who's got it.
So something that I think is really important to point out about Paul right before that scene, you see him in the car driving through past street sex workers.
Oh, I wrote that down.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the tropes that I wrote down, where it's the disposable sex worker trope. Because, like, you know that he didn't tell them. And you also know that they hear a lot of weird shit from people. So, like, if he did tell them, they wouldn't believe it, and he would know they wouldn't believe him. So it's like, again, lack of consent.
I wrote, did they actually pass to a sex worker? I hate that. Yeah. Like, it was so infuriating, because you're back to the same exact thing from the beginning, where it's like, I'll do what I have to do to get rid of this. I don't care what I have to do, like, who I have to ruin to do this. Like,
yeah. And I feel like that ties back in. I might just be the zany socialist, but I think that it really does tie into, like, the ideologies of capitalism, where it's kill or be killed, everyone for themselves. And, like, the men in the movie, and later Jay, when she does that boat thing, that's really awful. Yeah, talk about that in a second. But basically, they're saying every person for themselves, that there is no working together. Like, they do try to work together as a group.
They do.
They don't work together broadly. They work together as an insular group.
Right, and they don't succeed.
No, they do not succeed. Spoiler.
Not at all.
In case you couldn't tell, this will be full of spoilers. But
sorry.
Sorry about it. But essentially, I think that it's kind of a reflection of a capitalist mindset, where it's like, I'm going to screw you over to save myself. Whereas instead, there could be a collective instead of individualistic. So what if you had, like, a group of people that were protecting each other and organizing to protect each other? And what I am suggesting is a fucknet, where you just have a network of people that agree to have sex at different times and stagger it out so that they never die.
I've never heard fucknet used so scholarly.
Well, you know, TM. It's mine. Trademark.
Can't take it. Sorry, everybody. I know you wanted it. You can't have it.
I know that it's, big IP, but it's mine.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's it. You never really see their parents. I've mentioned that in my notes as well. In the fact that, like, you see them a little bit, maybe in the beginning. The one girl, I'm horrible with names, but the one girl, she gets shot.
Yara.
Like, straight up shot. Yara gets shot in the leg, and you never see her parents. You never see who gets her to the hospital, how she is, like, who takes care of her, what happens. You just see this group trying to fix things.
Yep.
And it not really going well. Like, all you do is see them, it's every man for themselves in this capitalistic idea, but also, like, even this group. I mean, this group was like, well, we'll help each other. We don't need anyone else, kind of thing. It was very frustrating. It was very frustrating to watch them just, like, not do well. Like, and to not really have any solutions outside of their group.
Yeah. And that's like a tenet of horror films, is to, like, create a sense of isolation and desperation from that. And then you mentioned Yara, and this was, okay, so I love TVtropes.com. They're not sponsoring us, they should, but I absolutely adore, you know how you can go, like, down a Wikipedia hole where you just, like, page to page to page? I can do that so easily with TV tropes, because in each article, it can be, like, an article on the trope, and then it has a master list of, like, films it was in, TV shows, like, books, podcasts, music. Oh my god. Okay, so we're gonna talk tropes. Are you familiar with the word trope?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, each, like, when I went to tvtropes.com, it follows, it gave a list of the tropes in the movie, and then you can, like, it'll also say, this can be similar to or mistaken for this trope. And I went through and I, like, pulled some of my favorite from the list.
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay. So the first one that I pulled was cat scare. And it's, like, in a horror film where, the tension is increasing and things are getting scary and the silence is deafening, and then it's like a cat. And you're, like, scared. And you're like, oh, it's just a cat. But then it can also be, like, flipped on its head if after you're like, oh, it was just a cat, and then the stabby stab person is behind you. So there are lots of ways to incorporate a cat scare. There's also the creepy child trope. And that death by sex.
On that.
Yeah. And
it's like, well, this one was full of that.
And then disposable sex worker, which we did talk about. My favorite tropes is does not like shoes. Because she's barefoot. She's barefoot for a significant portion of the film.
Like, listen, there are parts where I'm like, I get it. You had no time. You got to get out of there.
Yeah.
But at what point are you like, I'm just going to live in my shoes? Like, just live in your shoes. Just, I mean, like, I got a pair of Keds that, like, they're pretty comfy. Like, I could sleep in those bad boys. Just leave them on.
It's like, I gotta be ready to go at a moment's notice.
She never had her shoes on.
No.
Oh my god.
Then there's also the door handle scare. So, you know, like, where you're watching the door handle turn.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, it's just Yara. And then tall man with no eyes behind her.
Oh my god. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of, just real quick.
Yeah.
There was scary tall man. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's creepy hissing child.
Mm-hmm.
Who scared you more? I'm curious.
Oh my god.
Which one? Because, like, if we're being honest, those are the two that I think are, like, the most significant. Yeah. And they're so scary. So, like, if you had to choose, which one was just horrifying? I have my answer, and I'm curious what yours is.
So I think if I were to be followed by one of them, I think I would prefer the tall man, because he's easier to spot from a distance, and it's harder for him to get through small doorways. Children are really fast. They can be quiet when they want to, and they're unpredictable.
Literally, my answer is the same. I agree. I had a lot less reasons. My reason literally was just, I did not like that kid's face.
No.
I did not like when he put his little face down and did his little way, like I did not like that.
Did he have sharpened teeth, or did my mind put that in there because I was so scared of this child?
I think our minds may have put them in there. I don't think this kid looked that weird, but he was all crunched over and he, like, did his weird little hiss. I was super not into it. Like, the tall man, yeah, he's spooky. I get it. He scared me, you know, this time. But that kid, I forgot about that kid. Oh my god, it gives me the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it. Because he's all crouched down, he's all skinny, he's got his little tank top on. Ugh.
Don't like it.
Okay. I'm glad we're on the same page. I just wanted to get that out of the way.
Yeah. No, it's good that we agreed that we would be chased by the same form of the entity. This is important for hosts.
Yeah. Definitely.
So door handle scare. There's also the drone of dread. In this case, it's the score. So I think, the music.
I loved the music so much. Not only did it sound like a video game, which I already said, but it was just so good. And there were parts where the music was, like, really quiet. And then there were parts where it was, like, super loud. And it always was at the perfect moment. Like, I don't know. It was quiet at unexpected times. It was loud at unexpected times. It was just great. It highlighted whatever action was happening. I'm a sucker for good music. Like, once you got good music in it, I'm like, I'm on board. You got me.
Yeah.
Like, and same with, like, lighting. I thought the lighting also looked very, like, video game-esque, where it almost looked like they were being lit by, like, headlights sometimes. It was, like, very, very little amounts of, like, natural lighting in this movie, I feel like. It always looked a little different and weird, and sometimes neon. I was in love with it.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, I could go on and on about the lights.
Going back to the music, it just reminded me that, like, it had that 80s synthy sound.
Yes.
And that was, you know, we talk about how this movie does not take place in a recognizable timeline, and it's, like, purposely anachronistic. And one of those things is that it's also very nostalgic of the 80s. And that's because that was, like, one of the golden ages of horror films. And, like, definite homages to Halloween. So, like, in the scene where she's in school, that's a scene from Halloween, basically. And, like, when she's leaving and she's being followed. And then, like, the last scene where she and Paul are walking away, that's, like, them. Yeah. So.
Yeah, they had some great, great moments. And the timelessness also, like, with my favorite thing, finding the products. They only had a few. The only one I really noticed was the Coca-Cola that they're drinking. Was it vanilla Coke or cherry Coke?
I feel like it was
cherry. Or was it just regular Coke?
I don't
know. Well, they had, like, cans of Coke, and that was, like, the only product you really see throughout the whole movie. And even the cans that it was in didn't look, like, modern, but they didn't look that old. They did a great job with every little tiny thing being, like, I really couldn't tell you what time period things are supposed to be.
No.
There were things that looked like they could be from the 80s. There were things that looked like they could have been from like the 70s.
Yep.
But then she's got that clam phone, which you know is like, what is that? You're like, that's not old. But that's not new.
Phone.
Like,
yeah.
the clam phone.
The clam phone.
Which is not a phone. That thing's an e-reader. What did we call it?
A C-reader. A shell phone.
Genius.
Or a C-reader.
A shell phone. Yeah, because like all she does is read poems from it. So it's not a phone, but like I loved that.
Yeah.
They were just the weird, like not giving them phones, giving them this weird thing is just great. Added to it.
Yeah. Ugh. Absolutely. And like I was trying, like this was the second time I was watching it, and I knew from the first time, like, okay, I'm gonna really try to look out for clues on when this is. And like the cars that they're driving around in are like 80s station wagons. And then there are some cars from like the 90s. And then they're always talking on corded telephones.
Yes, which, so you never know.
And then like their TVs are like the old style TVs. And the movies they're watching on those are decades before that.
Ugh.
And
it was it was just cool. They so many things just led to being like, what? When is this? What is happening? And then, like you said, with like it takes place in Detroit, and with all the like the decline, and it's supposed to look kind of run down, so you know that like it can't be that modern. Like it was interesting.
Yeah, man, I could just keep getting stuck in like the timepiece.
I know. There's so many parts about this.
There was an interview with Mitchell, and like they're like, "Where'd you get the idea for this?" And he was like, "Well, I had this recurring nightmare as a child."
Oh god!
And so it came partly from that, but then he also ties it into like wanting that timelessness, not just so that like it's not dated by like an old flip phone or something, but also Goose just jumped on the floor and he was like a good bonk.
My god,
my
Goose. It's not even a big cat.
I know. But there's also like the idea that horror movies take place in an alternate reality, like a dream, where it's dream logic, where you can't solve a problem in a dream because it's dream logic.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, this did have a very dreamlike thing to it with like the lighting, the music, everything. I mean, everything was very like, what is happening? And may I just say, some of the best camera work that I've seen. There's a shot, like a running shot where they are spinning around very slowly in the high school when they're trying to find Hugh.
Love that
and
scene.
Information on Hugh. You see them go into the office and the camera really never stops moving and it circles around like the whole high school and you see everything and then it just ends looking back at them in the office after getting the information they wanted. And I loved that. Like, it was great. It was just this, like, quick little shot of, like, establishing where they were without having to follow them and make it this static shot. They were like, we're going to keep moving. You do you, and they'll know where you are because they watched you enter the office, and then we'll watch you come out of the office. I loved it.
Also see the entity in that scene.
You do? Yeah. Oh my god, you do.
And that's, like, another thing. So, you've watched The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor.
Yes.
So, it's, like, upon rewatch, in a dark room with a better TV than I had the last time, I rewatched them so that I can find the hidden ghosts, because there are like dozens of hidden ghosts, like the Plague Doctor and such. And so I feel like watching It Follows a second time is like every scene where there's more than just them, I'm like, okay, the entity is somewhere.
Yeah. Which is so funny that you knew to look for that, because I would have been absolutely screwed if this had happened to me, because not once did I pay attention to like other people. If this person wasn't like explicitly following her, I was like, must not be around. Like I was just
no screams, no problem.
Exactly. I was like, nobody's screaming, nobody's upset, we're good. Like, and you're here like, oh, I saw it, and I was like, saw what? like which just speaks to how different we truly are still. It's so, like, the things we pay attention to are so... I was so into that camera, like, scene that I was like, oh, look at... they must be using such a cool camera. Like, this is so great. And you were like, there's the ghost. And I love it. And, like, you really catch different things.
During that scene, I also wrote down, like, camera work, question mark, because I was like, I know this means something. I don't know what it means. I was like, Nikki'll get it.
I mean, yeah, because it was just, I know, it's so great when I get really sucked in when movies can show establishing shots without having to just, like, stare at their main character. Because, like, I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's nice when you can trust your audience to be like, you know where the main character is. We're going to show you other things and you can focus on that while still knowing who is in focus in this. Like, we knew what they were doing. We knew that they were getting info. We didn't need to see them doing it. And it was great. Because then when you get the shot of the entity, like, I wouldn't have noticed that. Nobody would have if they had just been staring at them the whole time. So I think it's nice when you can trust your audience to be like, you'll figure this out. We'll show you some more things. Like, it's good.
It just reminded me of another scene that has a similar style where it's not like rotating in place, but it's showing a pan of the hospital rooms. And there are characters of color, but they don't have speaking roles. They're just people in the hospital. So I thought that scene also showed kind of like a slice of life, but in like this really morbid way, because it's like everyone has a different reason for being in the hospital. Everyone was screwed over in a different way by the recession, where it's like you're seeing different forms of suffering and then you see her specific.
Right. And that's, another time where they're like, we know what the focus is here, but like, we can show you more, and that's nice. Like, I always like that. So
do you want to hear some of the other tropes?
Yes, I want to hear the other tropes.
Okay. We're like halfway through the list. I have to readjust my legs. Okay. Sorry. So, the end. Or is it? And this refers to the ending. Or is it?
Got that.
And then foreshadowing. Just every which way. Monochrome casting, which we've talked about.
Oh boy.
And then the motifs. Like, the motif of water is something that we've talked about, where it's like connects to childhood and innocence, but it can also, this is harkening back to my AP English class, water can also be symbolic baptism, where like in Song of Solomon, there's this like turning point in the story, if I am remembering correctly, which I may not be because it's been like a decade, but the main character is like caught in this torrential downpour and it's like a turning point for him. And so like that's a baptism and like a rebirth.
Oh, interesting.
But then there are also ironic baptisms where it's like Eustacia Vi in it's not Wuthering Heights. I'll remember it in a minute, but it's another like period piece that is kind of similar. But Eustacia is like this very unlikable character, which is probably tied up in a lot of gender stuff. But she like drowns, and so that's an ironic baptism. And so there are a lot of different ways to like view water, and I find it interesting to kind of start with that one because like in one of the first scenes, like she's swimming before her date with Hugh, and it's like this very childhood thing. And then after the scene where she ostensibly has sex with the guys on the boat, she comes home and the pool is destroyed. Like one entire wall of the pool has been like collapsed and it's like emptied. And it's like, oh, this is lost innocence. And this is like a foreclosure on rebirth. This is potentially a moral event horizon.
And then she leaves. I mean, that pool is destroyed where she like, you know, spent so long being, I thought like it was like her safe place because she loved that pool. And then they go to another pool that she went to as a kid. Like they go to another pool where she's like, oh yeah, we haven't been here since we were kids. Like they basically just go to another place where she can be like, well, this is where I was as a kid. This is where I felt safe. Like that was interesting.
And
that is really interesting.
Complicated again because the entity in that form takes on the form of her father.
Her father! And I know.
There are like hints at certain points that he may have been abusive. And so it's like this, again, like lost childhood where it's not exactly the end of innocence, but it was like a childhood loss that she never got to have because of abuse or whatever.
Interesting.
And this is not to say whatever to abuse at all.
No.
So the motif of water, and then plucky comic relief is Yara, because she could literally be removed from the movie and nothing would change plot-wise.
Oh, no.
Like, she gets shot in one scene, but even that could be taken out. Like, she has no
bearing. It really
bearing.
didn't change anything.
Yeah. And I love Yara. But
I love Yara. She does read some cool poems. I'll give her that. I loved her poems, but, like, could have been read by anybody, really. But, like, without her, I mean, you don't get those moments that are, like, kind of great. Like, she's got some moments where you're like,
the fart joke.
I needed a... Yeah, you're like, I needed a moment. Like, that's good. So, listen, if I was in a movie, I've come to terms with it. I know I would be the comic relief. I'm the Yara of every horror movie. You could take me out. It wouldn't make a goddamn difference. But you'd miss it. Like,
I think if I were in a horror movie, I would be the person that is aware that shit's fucked, but does not solve it and does not survive. I am not final girl material, where it's like, I'm like, shit, this is what's happening, and I am helpless to stop it. We're on this train, I am not driving it.
You would be like final girl by accident. Like, you'd be like, oh no, like, I'm still here, like, oh god.
Did not plan for this. Pulls out spreadsheet.
You'd be like, I took notes. You're like, okay.
It's like, I'm so busy in a different room taking notes, and like the slasher happens in the other room.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that, like, you know, you make it by pure like, you know, adrenaline or anything like that. It's like, I was taking notes. I forgot you were here, man. Like,
so I was quietly in the corner with a book. You didn't notice I was there.
Whereas I'm just absolutely screaming and making loud jokes, and they're like, well, we're gonna kill you first. And I'm like, that's understandable.
I respect your first move.
Yeah, like, I was like, totally get it. Would have done the same. But yeah, Yara was great. I mean, I'm not saying every movie needs a comic relief. That's, you know, you really don't. But I did like this had one, because they're teens. You can't expect them to be serious. I feel like if you didn't have Yara, it would have been a little less, not that this movie is believable, but a little less believable in their ages. Because, like, you're meant to believe that they're, like, what, 15, 16, or I guess 18,
19,
right? Maybe?
She's in college.
Okay, so yeah. Okay, yeah. So you're meant to believe they're, like, 19 years old.
Yeah.
You're not going to have, like, 5 kids that are all just super serious. So having that one that's, like, an absolute goober is great. Because, like, that makes it a little more believable.
Yup. So we have our plucky comic relief, Yara.
Right.
And then there's also the rewatch bonus, which we've talked about already.
Which you talked about, yeah.
Sex is Evil, which is a kind of repeat of the Death by Sex, but just a remix on it.
Right.
And then Trauma Swing is literally the name of one of them.
Oh my god.
And it's so true.
She does, doesn't she?
Yeah.
She goes to that swing.
She goes to the swings.
That loss of innocence, that childhood.
Yeah.
This movie's full of it.
So there were, like, so many more tropes on that site, but I only pulled those because they were the ones that I also picked out as I was going, and also I thought were fun.
And also, yeah, I was like, once you say them, you're like, oh, yep, that's obvious. Like the no shoes thing. Like, I didn't realize it at first until you said it, and I was like, oh my god, you're right. Like, she never had shoes. Ever. Like,
fuck shoes.
Girl not wearing shoes? Oh, she had so much time. Just put them on. I understand once or twice, but, like, the whole movie? Come on. But yeah, I mean, I think we've really covered all of it. It's, even though we've, like, really dissected it and done all this, I mean, I still liked it. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those movies that, like, it has its flaws. I totally get that. But it is still a very good movie.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean,
if I were forced to rate this, I would probably give it 4.5 clam phones out of 5. Out of 5 clam phones.
I was gonna say, I would probably give it, like, 4 to 5. And honestly, a lot of that comes from lighting, camera work, and music for me. Because they were so good. Like, the plot itself is great. I get that. It's amazing. But it was really just the atmosphere they created with the music, and the sound, and, like, everything. Really just was great.
I think I'd give it, like, a 5 for the, like, strength of the symbolism and metaphor.
Yeah.
But then, like, a 3 for the, like, continuity of the rules for the entity. Because they say that it's really smart. And that it always takes, like, the shortest route. But then it does things that just, like, don't make sense.
I feel like, the entity was a little bit, like, an afterthought for being such a big part of the movie. They were kind of like, we'll get to that. Like, it's fine. I mean, listen, they did make him spooky. That stupid little kid in the tank top's gonna haunt me forever. So, even with the continuity errors, I'm still scared of it.
Oh, for sure.
Me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say the same thing. If it didn't have such amazing, like, atmosphere and everything, I probably would give it less.
Mm-hmm.
But it does take you to a dreamlike place. Like, it really does. And I know that's what he wanted to do. So, like, hats off to you, man. You really did it. It was very weird. Having no time period.
Yeah.
Having all of that. It really was great.
You feel like you're in a reality bubble. Like, a separate, like, invented reality.
Like, I watched it, and it really took me out of everything else that was happening, because it just had nothing to remind me of anything else, because I was like, I don't know what this is. Yeah. So yeah, I would say the same thing. 4 out of 5 clamshell phones. Seashell. What do we call it?
Sea readers.
Sea phone. What the fuck?
Shell phone, sea reader, Clamdle. I think you said Clamdle.
I did say Clamdle at one point.
Oh,
didn't I?
the cursed
Clamdle. To be a Kindle, but with a because that's all it was a clam Kindle. A Clamdle. Oh my god.
4.5 out of 5 Clamdles.
Yeah, 4.5 out of 5 Clamdles. I would honestly watch again. Yeah. I've been listening to the soundtrack, can't lie. I love it a lot. I've had it on like repeat for a little bit now. Yeah. I mean, that's that on It Follows, I think.
Yeah. And I'm definitely going to rewatch at some point. Not this week, not next week, probably like next year, to be like, okay, when did I miss the XD again? I'm going to rewatch it tonight.
Oh my god, honestly, I might rewatch that one scene just to be like, did I really miss the entity in my favorite shot? Like, like really? The one that I paid attention to so much, I was so excited that I didn't see the monster. I mean, it looks like people. Like, okay, wait, I had a question though, real quick, before we go.
Mm-hmm.
How often was it naked?
It was naked a lot. Like at one point,
a lot,
okay.
Right?
So at one point, people think it's her grandpa, and it's standing naked on the roof of her house.
Yes, it is.
And like, why?
That was another thing, and we don't have to get into it because I know that's the that on That Follows. It follows, but naked. It was naked a lot, you know, and I couldn't tell if there was significance to when it was naked to when it wasn't. It's naked when you first see it.
Yeah, and that's
it's naked when it's a grandpa.
Hugh's mom when they first see it.
Yes, Hugh's mom.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, gross. Okay.
Yeah.
But then when it's like, you know, people you know, it looks to be clothed. When it was the scary boy, it had on that little tank top.
You really fixated on the tank top.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about this tank top that really gave me the creeps. Had that kid not had a shirt on, honestly, I would have been like, whatever. But for some reason, his nasty little tank top is haunting me more than anything else.
Get out of here with your nasty little tank top.
Get your nasty little tank top out of here, you little hissing kid. I don't need this in my life. And you know what? I think the tall man had a tank top too.
Man.
So he may have had a t-shirt, but either way. Still,
adjacent.
I'm all in a tank top. I think I might just be scared of tank tops.
This is valid.
I got a thing with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was that. I mean, I liked it a lot. Would watch again.
Would watch again.
So,
yeah.
Would watch again. So those are our thoughts on It Follows. Great movie. Go watch it if you haven't watched it. If you listened to this without watching it, that was fun. I'm sure this has been a wild ride for you.
Rip your brain.
Yeah, honestly. I think everything, all of our social media, we have Instagram, Twitter, I think Just Ghoul With It on both of those. Mm-hmm. At Just Ghoul With It. We have Patreon. I believe if you search Just Ghoul With It as well, it'll come up, yeah. And then our website, Just Ghoul With It podcast.
Nope.
.com. Nope. Just Ghoul With It pod.
Yep.
.com. We're new. We're figuring it out. So yeah, and I think the website is where you're going to post all your notes, right?
Yes.
Like so if you want to see Kate's like longer version of her notes, please go read them because I'm sure they are amazing. No one takes notes like you.
It's riveting if you want to see 3 pages of citations that are almost APA but are not, because I insist on putting someone's full name instead of their initials.
I just want, you know what, maybe we'll take a picture of my notes as a contrast, because I think at one point all I wrote was, this music is juicy. So comparatively, we take great notes here.
I mean,
I just, you know. So yeah, if you want to see those notes, I highly recommend it. Go read those. And, you know, stay spooky, stay scary, and come back next week.
Stay spooky, stay scared.
Stay spooky, stay scared.
Stay scared. The world is scary. Don't do that.
Stay scared. Everything's upsetting. And also, if you can find that seashell phone, send me one.
Oh, I want one.
Great.
S'il vous plaît.
Yeah, send us 2. Thank you.
It's an old makeup compact.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, someone make me this. Thank you. Send it to me. I'll give you my address. DM me on Twitter. Make it for me. Make one for Kate. And if you don't, why? Why didn't you?
Why didn't you?
Why didn't you?
We were very clear about what we wanted. I don't really see what happened.
It's like you don't even like us, guys. Come on. God.
It's like you don't even care.
God, bye. I'm ending it on that.
and that was It Follows. We had an absolute blast recording this. I hope that everyone enjoyed listening. This was our first episode, and it was so fun. If you liked it, you can review us on Apple Podcasts. We have a Twitter and an Instagram, and we're at Just Ghoul With It. We also have a website where Kate will post all of her extended show notes, and that is justghoulwithitpod.com. And you can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/justghoulwithit. Speaking of, we want to thank our patrons, Kim, Kelly, and Nihar. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you being with us. And we're absolutely thrilled to have you. And we'll see you next week.
I'm Nikki.
And I'm Kate.
All right, well, where do we go from here?
And today we'll be talking about kids.
If we just did the intro and then we were like, well, let's call it a day.